Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Jamie Dawson. I work for an organization called Oregon Wild. If you haven't heard of us, we're a statewide nonprofit based in Oregon, and we're dedicated to protecting and restoring Oregon's wildlands, wildlife, and waters as an enduring legacy for all Oregonians. We have an awesome panel tonight, and I'm going to get out of the way here in a quick minute and hand it over to them for the rest of the evening. But just a couple housekeeping things. So we are going to do a question and answers section after they've had some initial discussion. And as an attendee, you can drop a question in the questions box at any time. And it should be on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a little question mark in a bubble. So go ahead and enter your questions for the panelists there. And try not to send them in last minute. Feel free to send them as soon as they come up. So we usually get quite a few, and they can be hard to wade through. So if something comes up, feel free to send it there, and we'd love to hear from you. This is going to be recorded, so we will have it posted up on our website tomorrow, OregonWild.org, and you'll also get it sent to you in your email. And if the screen freezes or you're having some trouble hearing us, I recommend just exiting out, going back to that link that you received in your email, and then just starting it right back up. And if for some reason you're still having trouble after that, just drop me a chat here in the chat box, and I can try and help you troubleshoot it. Without further delay, I am so happy to have our panel tonight. We have some really incredible folks that I'm absolutely honored to get to meet and hear from. So I'll go ahead and start by passing it over to Chad. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I really appreciate it. I just want to say I really appreciate everybody tuning in this afternoon, night, and hope everybody will be able to glean into what we're going to share. We're having a conversation about this. First, before we start, I just actually want to acknowledge, the indigenous communities out there. Just want to kind of just bring that into light into this space as well. And on the personal partners who I've worked with, which is the Navajo Nation, the Quinault Nation, and the Gwich'in Nation. It's really important to have them in the space, of the community, because they're part of the whole Black and brown of many different race and communities in the outdoors that also voices that needs to be heard. People who don't know who I am, I'm also the president and founder of Soul River Inc. It's a nonprofit to where I merge veterans and at-risk kids from urban communities into the outdoors, into wild spaces, and where ultimate goal is raising our youth up into environmental ambassadors of conservation. The outdoors is really important to me, and just like everybody else, it's a special place. It's a healing place. It's a place where we can be able to find refuge and be able to let ourselves go. But unfortunately, there are many times and many stories amongst us where the outdoors does bring a fear, and it's a generational type of fear that's been passed down. And some of that is not just the passed down part, but some of it is real today and what we do and walk into these spaces. I am aware there's a lot of people that may be attending that maybe just be curious. And I've heard the stories of the fact that, there's no such thing as racism, especially in the outdoors. And so I just ask everybody to really, lean in before we respond emotion, etc., and just lean in and just listen to what we're saying and take the time to digest this, because it's definitely a different lens, and it's a lens from us, and we have stories to share, and there's many other people out there as well have their own stories of their experience, and it's really important that we have this discussion and to move forward. And so I'm gonna step back into this panelist, and everybody is pretty amazing here, and I'll just call one person out, and you can go ahead and take it from there. James, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Absolutely. My name is James Edward Mills, and I'm a freelance journalist and independent media producer. I'm based in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'd like to acknowledge the Ho-Chunk and Ojibwe nations on whose ancestral land I now make my home. I have worked in the outdoor recreation industry in one capacity or another since 1989, starting out working at the REI store in Berkeley. And from there, I went on to have a career in outdoor recreation sales and marketing, starting out working for the North Face, but also working with a variety of different companies ranging from Sierra Designs, Metolius, Trango, many other outdoor recreation companies that you might have heard of. But I've also worked for the last 15 years as a media producer and a freelance journalist with a specialty in diversity, equity, inclusion, and public land management. And I'm the author of the book, The Adventure Gap, Changing the Face of the Outdoors, and I host the blog and podcast series called The Deutsche Project. And essentially I talk about a variety of different cultural and social intersectional opportunities to engage people, particularly people of color, in the outdoors.
Awesome. Thank you. Richard.
Hello, everybody. My name is Richard Thornton. I use pronouns he, him. I'd like to acknowledge I am coming to you live from Seattle, which is the ancestral lands of the Duwamish, both past and present. They are still here, sharing their heritage and stewarding the land, and it's an honor to be speaking with everybody tonight. A little bit of background. I've studied environmental geography, University of Texas at Austin. I've spent the better part of the past decade plus working in the outdoor industry. I've focused a lot of my efforts on climate action, public lands advocacy, and social uplift. I've worked on conservation projects from Canyonland country in Utah all the way down to southern Chile. And right now, a lot of my efforts are being focused on the upcoming election and reducing barriers to voting across communities. Sharon.
Yes.
Welcome.
Hi. I can't see who I'm talking to, but hi, everybody.
Introduce yourself to us.
So I'm Sharon Ross, and I have a brand called Afrovivalist. It was dubbed to me a couple of years back, and it means African American survivalist. I have got into a niche of being one of the rare African American women who hunt, fish, and want to live a primitive life off grid. I also am into emergency preparedness, and my passion is to teach others to the importance of preparing for a natural disaster, meaning becoming a prepper and getting ready for disasters. That's all I got for you.
Awesome. Well, hey, before we dive in, I just want to say thank you to Chad for inviting us all here together for this important and necessary conversation. It's an honor to be here with such amazing human beings, and I'm really appreciative that I have the opportunity to help guide us through this conversation. And, you know, we're not going to solve all the world's problems tonight, obviously. You know, we're dealing with generational problems that require generational solutions and systemic problems that require a systemic approach. So kind of segueing into this first topic that we want to get into, you know, one of the things I feel like I've noticed of late is that a lot of our relationships in the modern day-to-day tend to kind of become a little transactional, whereas you know, when we're faced with crises, we need to really kind of dig into these meaningful relationships. And I feel like all of us as individuals, as people, you know, we kind of build this narrative based on the experiences that we've had. And, you know, we act on our values based on those experiences, and they shape who we are as people and how we interact with the rest of the world. And they're each unique to all of us. So with that being said, I'd like to ask each of you to tell the audience about some of the more impactful experiences that you've had in the outdoor space and recreational space, and you know, whether they be good or bad, memorable, less than memorable. You know, what stands out to each of you, you know, in that context?
James, you want to go? Can't hear you. Okay. Hey, James, while you figure out the vocal there, the audio, I'll go ahead and jump in. You know, I'm going to start with the impactful, the positive. You know, for me in the outdoor space, you know, it's always been my first step of approach is healing. You know, the healing space is what has been a radical turnaround for myself mentally and physically. When I step into the outdoors, it just engulfs me into nature's theater, especially when I'm wading in the water. You know, from my walk in life and where I came from as a veteran of PTSD, you know, I had to fight a lot of demons, and nature has this way or had a way to heal me in that process, you know. So the big impact to me is the healing piece. The other piece is community. Community is a big piece for me because through the healing process, I was able to resurge myself into a new community. And that community was a bunch of anglers and hunters and also scientists of the conservation world, you know, and they became my community and became kind of like my foundation as far as schooling me and educating me on the sport of fly fishing in the outdoors, and also through the whole process of looking at conservation in the water and the fisheries, et cetera, you know. And so that's a really big impact, you know, for me, that has put me in a place to where I'm able to push forward through my life, you know, and I'm able to always fall back into nature and use as a way of me regrounding myself through that process. The negative side is this ongoing fight of the fact that, you know, me being African American, me being Black in the outdoors, you know, it's a process of an everyday of fighting to, I always say, to see me of who I am, you know. And when I'm getting into the outdoors, there is this process of a barriers that I have to fight, you know, and essentially because when I'm come across, you know, Caucasian folks, you know, this mindset of, you know, just relax, get to the outdoors, you know, it's a place where you can breathe, exhale. Sometimes I don't get that, you know, and a lot of times I don't get that actually. And then there's also this place of mindset where I wish I can really understand what that means, because I'm constantly, the image that I carry, you know, my skin color, if when I'm walking into the outdoors, I have to fight the barriers of ignorance, the barriers of hate that comes at me, you know. And then when I can get to that end goal and get into that water, you know, that's when I'm able to find a glimpse of what that means to relax and find my soul, you know, or resurge myself and re-energize myself, you know. So it's definitely a process, and it's a balance between two worlds of good and that world of hate and ignorance that I have to walk every time when I get into the outdoors, you know. So I'm going to stop right there basically and let James step in if you're.
Yeah, I think my mic's working now. Hopefully you can hear me. And I apologize for that. My experience in the outdoors has been a little bit different. I mean, I've literally been spending my entire life, both as a young person through high school and in college, but as a lifelong adult, as a professional in the outdoor industry. You know, my experience as a person of color really wasn't especially profound until I started trying to encourage other people of color to become engaged in the outdoors. I mean, I grew up in a very socially and culturally motivated family. You know, I didn't have, you know, any real genuine race consciousness until, you know, I started trying to you know, figure out why there weren't more people in the outdoors who looked like me. And when I did start trying to do a more proactive job of getting more people in the outdoors, starting to tell more stories, it was only then that I started getting pushback. you know, and that pushback ultimately came from people who were convinced that there was no problem. But I was operating under the presumption that there were people who, for a variety of different reasons, were not able to have a positive relationship with the natural world. And it was really only then that, you know, I started to take a deeper look into some of the historical disparities that we've been seeing in terms of who spends time in nature and who doesn't. And we can like quite literally go all the way back to, you know, the earliest institutions of indentured servitude and slavery, and you know, ultimately the end of the Civil War, which led to Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era, and then redlining, and then legal segregation, and you know, all of these different things that created genuine, very direct prohibitions on doing anything in this country as a person of color. But it's really not until we take the time to deconstruct some of those issues that we ultimately understand that these prohibitions were put in place deliberately, you know, quite literally to prevent people of color, blacks in particular, to have a positive relationship in society in general. And it just happened to include the outdoors. I think that in order to correct these things, we're going to have to be just as deliberate in our efforts to remove them. You know, and today we're calling that anti-racism. You know, and the very notion of anti-racism, you know, doesn't mean that, you know, we are not fighting racism. You know, we're literally trying to do the opposite of racism, and that ultimately means to take very proactive steps towards making sure that people are welcome, engaged, giving them the ability to know that they are welcome, that they belong, and that their story is relevant to the experience of anyone spending time in the outdoors. And so much of what I'm doing, both as an educator and as a journalist, is to try to find these very positive messages, these very positive narratives that hopefully can provide role models for people to see themselves as part of the overall experience in the outdoors that does indeed include them, and ultimately it includes everyone.
Awesome. Yeah. Where did Sharon go?
I think we lost Sharon here for a second.
I'm here.
Oh,
Hey, Sharon, if you can keep your video on, that would be great.
Oh, I thought I'd just turn it on when I'm talking so you guys don't see me picking my nose or anything.
No, just keep it on. Just keep it on, please. Yeah.
Hi. Okay, so I have, okay, let me start over. I'm nervous. Hi. So I grew up in Southern Oregon. We were the first, I say we were the first Black family to visit and stay. I had been there since age 6 and went through the, I was the first African American to go through the first elementary, junior high, and high school there. So it was very interesting going through the new age of, you know, white people seeing a Black person or Black people in person. There's, you know, even times that I had, you know, go to the grocery store and have, you know, kids or people touch me because, you know, they thought my skin was, you know, should come off. You know, I didn't understand that as a kid. And my father, growing up, he was a military man, a Marine, and he knew the situation that I was being put in since I was the first one, the child going to those schools, and trained me to learn how to use a knife, learn how to fight, learn how to handle a gun and be responsible with it, on top of, you know, the family creating a homestead. It was something that, you know, when people ask me would I do it all over again, absolutely I would, because I feel that the majority of the people that I went to school with, they went home to their parents who or grandparents who happened to be prejudiced and talk about the Black folks. And when they came to school, it was totally opposite. So I was able to reverse some of that thought in the kids' minds, because, you know, as we go through this process, I've learned that, you know, you're not born prejudiced. You're not born to be that type of person. You're educated by your family members. And I feel that it should stop there with the parents and the grandparents. So my life as Afrovivalist has revolved from that because of my experiences in going in the outdoors. I'm not one to do that by myself. I will not do it. My military father trained me not to do it because I am a woman and I am an African American, that I am very, very vulnerable when it comes to me being out in the forest and hunting by myself. So I'm always accompanied with someone of a lighter shade to go hunting with. That's all I got for you.
Thanks for sharing those stories. I'll kind of chime in too with some, as the white guy in the room, with some experiences. I think, you know, as a public lands advocate, as an adult, I spend a lot of time trying to promote access opportunities for people of all walks of life to get in these outdoor spaces, because that's the surest fire way to get people to have that positive, hopefully, experience in an impactful way to where they will want to grow into stewards and advocates themselves to, you know, inspire others to do the same. And so, you know, I had the good fortune and privilege growing up to get those access opportunities at an early age. And a very positive one that stands out to me was I was probably like, I don't know, 10 years old or so, on a family camping trip to White Sands National Monument, New Mexico, now a national park. And it was the first time I had truly experienced seeing the Milky Way in all its glory. And if any of you out there have had that same experience, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And for me, it wasn't until much later in life as an adult that I looked back on that experience and realized that kind of awestruck moment I had was this aha moment of that I'm very small and insignificant and very much a part of something that's greater than myself. So that was my first early experience of this sense of community, looking back on that. And it's kind of, you know, guided me all along this way to try to inspire others. And a negative one I had, I happened to be in Zion National Park back in 2013 when one of the government shutdowns happened because of a fiscal, you know, argument. And so everybody, white, black, brown, foreign, everybody was kicked out of the park. They put up police tape on the vistas on the roads. They closed the campgrounds, and everybody had to vacate. And it was one of the more surreal experiences I've had in an outdoor space, because I knew I had the privilege to come back at some point. But for a lot of those families, whether they were local or from abroad, that was their like chance in a lifetime to experience this truly amazing place. And I could see the pain and the heartache that they had to cut that short. And that's always stood out in my mind too. But for the audience, you know, I'd ask you to reflect on those same sort of moments and maybe perhaps step outside of the box and think about, when you're in those spaces, how your experience is just very much different from other people who maybe don't look like you, and that we need to be open to that, and that everybody has a different relationship to these lands based on those experiences. And so those, you know, for me as a white male, when I go into the, you know, a wilderness setting or an outdoor space, you know, I'm thinking, oh, you know, what predator higher up on the food chain is around that could pose a danger to me, or what kind of you know, inclement weather is coming in that poses a threat, or you know, where's the next water source? All these very indiscriminate things. I've never had to be in a you know, setting where I think I'm in danger purely because of the way I look. And I think that's an important thing for people listening to understand, that is not how anybody should experience, you know, an outdoor recreational opportunity. It should be a space, like Chad mentioned, for community, not only with nature, but with the rest of us who are very much a part of that natural system, and that we are just guests and visitors, and that we should all act accordingly. And hopefully, this conversation can kind of spark a movement towards that end. Does anybody have any things they want to throw in on that topic while you've been thinking?
Well, I can tell you that my earliest experience of seeing the Milky Way for the first time was really transformational for me too. I mean, I was a teenager and was camped on the summit of Mount San Bernardino in Southern California. And I was shocked because growing up as a kid in Los Angeles, I didn't think that it was possible for you to see more than 10 or 20 stars at a time, because I didn't realize that such a thing could even exist. But when I saw, such a dense blanket of stars for the first time, that was a really transformational moment for me, because, I really was put in the context of, my very small, insignificant, yet still vital part of the universe. And when I stop and think about the things that I'm concerned about when I'm in the outdoors, I'm never worried about the natural environment. I'm not worried about predators. I'm not worried about weather. I'm not worried about, my ability to navigate in the natural environment. My only concern is the people that I might encounter out there, and having an awareness that there are people out there who don't value my life as much as, they might value someone else's life who, isn't me. And I just think that we need to be aware, that as we bring people into the outdoors, as we're introducing people into this context, that we're aware that everybody comes to this from a different place, and everybody comes to this with a certain amount of apprehension. And we can't assume that everyone's experience is the same as ours. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, I've shared with people the apprehension of other people with spending time in the outdoors, and the instant reaction is, oh, well, that would never happen, or that doesn't happen, or I've never heard of such a thing, so therefore it can't be true. But the reality is, what we really need to take the time to put ourselves into someone else's place and think about, what it is that is making them nervous, apprehensive, or even afraid to be in the outdoors.
Right. James, you said something that clinged to me, and and you're right. It's, the outdoors is neutral. It's the people that's in the outdoors that we have to pay attention to, and to be really open with this is that we have people even in our urban spaces that are that plays a role in the hate, plays a role in the ignorance, plays a role also in the positive of joining and holding hands and showing love for all. We have all kinds of people that moves through the urban world, and a lot of those people who are outdoor people that's in that same space goes into the outdoor world as well. They bring that into the outdoor world, and so that's where the barriers, et cetera, come into place, because that person may come, and if that person is in a negative space or space of hate and ignorance, what they know in the urban world, it follows them right into the outdoor world, and you can confront that easily in the outdoor world, and that's a pretty scary place to be. I think up to this point of this this talk that we're having, I got a lot of emails and also text messages from people of color, male and female, and telling me just a glimpse of their story of how they are afraid, and it's so many layers of their stories, unbelievable, of how this is opening up, and it's allowing others to tell their story, and so people don't know, and they in this space saying the racism does not exist, hate does not exist, ignorance does not exist in the outdoors. If you happen to know some people, and if you can give them that safe space that safe space where they can be able to feel comfortable, ask them to share their story. You know, you'll probably be surprised of because we are moving through with a voice that is under the cover here, and we don't say it because we already feel uncomfortable, you know, in these spaces. And so we will speak this amongst our own people, you know, in our own groups, and some of us will laugh about it, et cetera. But it's real, you know, because we all have shared experiences. And the reason why you're not hearing these experiences because we have not yet felt comfortable to be in these wild spaces, you know. And so there's a fear that lurks amongst us, and it's not the outdoors, it's the people that's coming into the outdoors that are, you know, in that ignorant, hate, racist type of space. You know, they bring that in, you know, and so we have to face that. And so it's like having to rewire, you know, so everybody who's listening, you know, it's like it's if you feel uncomfortable of what we're saying, then that's a good thing, because that's how we always been feeling of going into outdoors. It's feeling uncomfortable, you know, and that has been coming kind of like our uniform of how we are getting into the wild, etc. You know, sometimes we have to prep ourselves, you know, and in order to get into the wild, I've heard women who have women of color that has shared with me about, okay, well, before I go, let me kind of get myself amped up and ready and et cetera, because in that space, they're about to step into a space where they feel uncomfortable, period. You know, and so feeling uncomfortable is our normal. If you're feeling uncomfortable, it may be your new, but we ask this to stay in that space and just listen to what we're saying and just digest that a little bit. Just digest, because what we're speaking to is speaking of a many different voices out there that has not been able to come to you know, to a place where people can hear it. But there's a lot of voices out there of people of color out there that can share similar or even interesting stories of what we're talking about.
I think those are some excellent points. One thing that stood out to me was, you know, the diversity topic, and, you know, being having studied environmental science and into the natural world, you know, we celebrate diversity. That is where an ecosystem, which is a system, it thrives the most when it is diverse and balanced, and you know, everything is working in harmony and complementary, and it's healthy and it's not toxic situation. And you know, I think that kind of juxtaposes to the current sort of the social environment that we are experiencing right now in this country, and also by extension in outdoor spaces. And you know, for me, when I'm in outdoor spaces, you know, I think to myself, well, why isn't it more diverse? And even so, you know, sometimes when I'm in national parks, I hear more foreign languages than even Americans.
Yeah.
And I think anybody who's spent enough time in a national park could probably attest to that. So, you know, I think it's the responsibility of an outdoor recreationalist to not just have a transactional relationship with that experience, but to be stewards of not only the land, but that social environment that takes place on that land. And that a lot of that responsibility falls on folks who have the privilege of going into those spaces and not feeling scared or threatened, but fostering a more inclusive environment where literally, you know, that simplest definition would be creating a space where people feel safe and free to just be who they are as individuals. You know, I like to say I'm not different from you, I'm different like you. And we should celebrate those differences. And what better place to do that than in the great outdoors with a campfire and a fresh caught fish? You know, those are very visceral human experiences that we can all relate to in a positive way. And to your point, Chad, that's where I think sharing these stories is very important, and being open to different experiences from different people and embracing that.
I agree.
So we got a larger topic here to unpack on this next sort of question. But bear with me for 1 second. So, the kind of the larger theme here is this notion of not just systemic racism, but how that applies to outdoor recreation and conservation. So I'd like to ask y'all, how do you feel society's systemic racism, not only now, but throughout our history, has impacted outdoor recreation and conservation efforts? How can that be improved upon? What are sort of the blind spots and the barriers that that the audience could be more aware of?
James, you want to jump on this one?
Yeah, Sharon's trying to talk with her.
Oh.
Sorry, forgot to turn my mute button on. I think where we need to start is we need to see more color when it comes to advertising, because a lot of us, if we don't see ourselves or anyone who looks like us, we don't want to go there. So if we see more of us, the melanin shades out there doing these things, then people would be more pumped to get out there and join in. For me, I still don't see African American women out there in the hunting realm. And it's always me, and even attending things like prep groups where I'm preparing, I'm the only one there. So I think the only reason because no one was showing up is because in those groups, there was no color. There was no person that looked like them. So I think we need to add more into advertising to let people know that it is safe to be out there among the woods.
Well, I could not possibly agree more. And I can tell you just from a marketing perspective, going back 20 years in my career, the biggest issue was being able to find authentic representation that wasn't tokenized. So we could get actors, to appear in commercials and in ads and so forth. But frankly, the outdoor industry was never about that. But then the question is, so how do you find someone who has the skills and the experience and the authentic presentation to be able to do it correctly? That's problematic too. And so ultimately what myself and several people in the industry have been doing for the last couple of years is, mentoring, as what Chet does, to mentoring young people, people who are novices, to be able to help them build the skills that they need to be authentic representatives of the activity. So much so now that we now have these amazing affinity groups that have been created where those authentic individuals are all out there now. And so there's less of an excuse to say, oh, well, there aren't any people of color out there, because there certainly are, there always have been. Now they're infinitely more proficient at these activities than they have been in generations past. And they're young and they're sharp and they look good, and now's the time. Now the question is, can we convince industry and the nonprofit sector to support these individuals through marketing dollars, through paid promotional gigs, and not in gear, to actually pay people what they're worth in order to have positive representation in your advertising, in your marketing, in your storytelling, and so at that point, I think that, Sharon, to your point, what we will ultimately see is infinitely more people saying, wow, I see someone out there who looks like me, who has a similar experience to mine. I see myself in them. They come from my neighborhood. They have a similar life experience to me. I can do these things too. And at that point, we ultimately have the ability to normalize the behavior so that ultimately we won't have to have this conversation anymore. But what ultimately needs to happen, though, is that everyone needs to see people for who they are, as not just people of color, but avid outdoor enthusiasts and also very competent and enthusiastic stewards of the land.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
I agree. I just want to throw in there, I think, with that question, what you were saying, Richard, as well, and between Sharon and James, I like to even, throw in there about leadership. I think leadership is really king of how a company lead themselves and present themselves into people of color, of organizations of the outdoors. And I think that's very important. That's a self-reflection of the company that has to kind of like do a reverse look at themselves in the mirror and say, okay, how are we going to present ourselves, and how are we going to interact and engage with people of color of organizations, because we do have a different way of how we communicate and how we approach the outdoors versus how you approach the outdoors. When you look at historical or look at culturally, Hispanic families like to go to the outdoors, but they do it in families. They go together, and they celebrate many different ways. And African Americans, we do our own thing together. So I think it's really like when companies want to come in and want to step in and help engage, it's about, how you're going to show up and how you're going to present yourselves to the organization, but I'm going to like put a little bookmark right there. And when I mean show up and present, I don't mean coming into a space of a savior mentality, basically, that we're going to save you. We're going to, make this happen. A lot of people of color of different communities in the outdoors, it's not always about, this mindset of that we're broke or we don't have enough money. It's not really about that. Some of us, it's more about just really acknowledging, because, when you look at an African American kid and they're playing basketball, et cetera, or playing football, they got joy and passion. That family, that mom and dad goes above and beyond to get them the gear that they need. Period. They will do it. They will find a way. And so to the outdoor company, et cetera, it's more like, what we need to try to foster that passion and get them on board, et cetera. And so, where we can be able to move forward together into the outdoors. It's the same sort of concept of that kid with the passion. Foster our passion, and whatever that may come in forward that we may need in outdoors, you may be surprised. A lot of us, we will find a way. If we're passionate about something and if we love what we do, we will find a way to buy and get what we need to move forward. It's not always that we need you to give us the gear, And also going on what James saying is, it's also really important to acknowledge the work that many of leaders, especially amongst people of color, that are doing, and if there's a possibility to compensate that person, et cetera, when you bring them in, please, you compensate them. That's just another way of acknowledging their work, what they've done, and how they came from point A to point B. And so, so it goes down to how we show up for one another as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Chad. I'll jump in there on some thoughts. I think, we hear a lot about on systemic racism. It's just that, a system. And so, I've been learning a lot as we go along over the years about this, and it's something I think that our white folk in the audience should understand, is that it's a system that we're born into whether we wanted to or not, and we are benefactors of that system that is geared towards raising up white people and holding others back. And oftentimes that happens without our intent. But we have to acknowledge the impact of that, regardless of what our intentions were. And it's not enough, in my personal opinion, to simply be just an ally in solidarity. I mean, that's good. That's a baseline that we can start from. But that kind of insinuates, you're on the sideline, you're there for support, or you're going to come in and save or fix the situation. But we need to be more of co-collaborators and co-conspirators, and working together as equals and as partners to combat this, and more so, to acknowledge the fact that this is a white people problem, and it's up to us to fix it. You know, it's not, you know, if we allow you know, big oil to go into the Arctic refuge and muck it up for the caribou and the Gwich'in, it's not their responsibility to figure it out. It's up to us to right those wrongs, because we allowed it to happen. We were in that position of privilege and we didn't do anything about it. And so that's just kind of something that I've been, you know, kind of thinking about lately, where it's, you know, we don't want people to go out there and bear the burden of privilege. We want people to, you know, realize we all have blind spots, acknowledge your privilege, own it, and then leverage it for good. Because if you're not doing that, you know, we're not doing enough, and it's going to take much longer. And you know, that's just kind of how I've been navigating it in my own mind. I don't know if that makes sense to y'all, but.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Richard. Thank you. You know, I was just, you know, thinking, you know, when you're talking about like, especially I come across a lot of folks, especially when the article came out, you know, so many folks are saying, you know, it goes back to I don't see racism, you know, I've been in outdoors and there's no such thing, and you know, and with that privilege is, you know, you have a choice, and you have 100% choice to see how you want to see it. And move through the outdoors how you want to move through outdoors. But I can guarantee you that to the ones that are not seeing it, if you pair up and make a friend with someone of color, and what I mean make a friend, I'm not saying just to come and just hang out. I'm talking about you integrate yourself into their lives and you be with them. Your lens will start to change. Your lens will start to change. You will start to see a shift in how your friend is actually being treated. You know, all you have to do is to observe what's going on, etc. But in order you to actually get that lens and to understand what's going on is for you to walk with them. You know, integrate your life and walk with them, and you will start to see that. You know, it's not about coming in and helping them. You know, yeah, well, I know John Doe or Jane Doe down the street, and they're African American, and I can go down there and I help them every once in a while, and they're good people, etc. That's fine, okay? But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, you know, integrating where they are really close with you. You're going through a process with them, whether it's in outdoors, etc., and allow them the space to share and allow them the space to talk about what they're going through or even how they're feeling. Give them that space for them to express themselves. Again, your lens will change according to the depth of however you create that relationship with that person of color, you know, and you'll be able to understand that and see what's going on, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important. But, you know, for most people, that's really hard. You know, it's hard to, you know, put yourself in a position where you're literally seeing the world through someone else's eyes, and to put yourself in their position. But the only way that any of this is going to change is if we do that. I mean, everyone's got to do that. You know, I mean, because I just don't know from my own experience. I mean, as a Black man, I have a very limited experience with poverty. You know, I have no idea what it's like to miss a meal, you know, or to not know where I'm going to sleep, or have any other of the experiences that are very common among people of color. You know, so I need to understand that these are challenges that people have, and I have to work in whatever way that I can to help to ameliorate those issues. I mean, how do I help, you know, people who are homeless or who are nutritionally deprived to be able to get the things that they need to survive? I think the same thing is ultimately true with spending time in the outdoors. You know, for a long time, I had no idea what it was like to feel uncomfortable in the outdoors because of the color of my skin. You know, but once I started learning how it is critically important, that's when, you know, I decided to figure out how to help other people do that. I think that you know, people in our community who aren't people of color are going to have to figure that out too. But they need to do it not for the people that they want to help, but so that they can better understand themselves, so that they can ultimately become better allies, to be able to help to, you know, dismantle the systematic racism that has got us to the position where a conversation like this is even necessary.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Sharon, you about to say something?
Oh, I said right. I agree with them because it shouldn't be necessary. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had where, my white friends don't understand why I don't go out, and hunt by myself because they can do it. They do it all the time, and I find myself having to explain to them the reasons why. And they're like, oh, that's never going to happen. But all it takes is one person to mess up the whole thing um, for the comfort of being, outdoors and being able to enjoy it. Not just hunting. I mean, just simply going on a hike. You can run across people who, are blatantly racist and will say something to you on, I had a situation where I was on a trail here in Oregon, and it was me and my dog. It was in the morning, so I went by myself. And wouldn't you know, the day that I go by myself, I end up, sharing a path with a gentleman who was really, really racist and made me very, very comfortable. Thank goodness, I had my dog with me to be in between us, but it's out there, and that's one of the reasons why it's scary, because you really don't know who you're going to come across when you're out there. You don't know what their demeanor is going to be. You don't know what their background is. You don't know if they're packing. They might be packing something on the trail,
True.
So you just can't. We can't let our guards down. I mean, my white friends can go out there and just enjoy themselves and have fun and not think twice about, the dangers of others. But for me, a woman of color, I can never let my guard down, ever. And so sometimes it's not as fun as I want it to be because of that. But the only time I let my guard down is when I know I have my other friends with me, that are of another shade of color, and and I know they have my back when it comes to protection and not allowing someone to harm me.
That makes me a little sad, emotional.
Yeah.
It's because the idea of going into the outdoors, it's supposed to be this place of safety. It's supposed to be this place of healing, and you're not supposed to have those kind of worries and concerns to burden you when you're out there. But unfortunately, that comes with the program of where we are at right now. I challenge the people out there listening and to look at is that if you take another step back and hear what Sharon is talking about, and if you look at outdoor organizations already that are doing different work in the outdoors of people of color, there are outdoor colored groups that are silo and they are doing their own thing in the outdoors, etc. But again, take the step back is like we all should be able to go in together and have a good time. But the purpose and the reason why you got these groups are together is because they feel comfortable in their group. That's why we have different people of color groups around, because the fact they don't feel comfortable by themselves going into the outdoors, but they feel much more comfortable being with that group because it's safety. It makes them feel relaxed and they can enjoy that moment and create that moment amongst themselves, and it's nothing wrong being in different groups, and that's fine, but it's just when I just want to challenge, the people out there is like, look at that with a different lens and look at the reason why we got these groups. The reason why we got these groups because they feel safe. Outdoors is supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be a relaxation place. It's supposed to be where families, individuals will be able to go out and create moments. family moments, memories of a lifetime, the beautiful hikes to the mountains, to the river, etc. We supposed to be able to go out and experience these, either if we're in a group or we out of the group, regardless, and not worry about safety. But unfortunately, we're in this space where safety is a concern. At the same time, we are fighting access to make it, accessible for everybody to get into the outdoors, but this conversation and the things that we're talking about is part generational, and it's part been going on for many, many years. This is a behind the scenes conversation that speaks among people of color in the outdoors, and we talk about these kind of things all the time, but now we're able to bring this out and talk about it. But I ask people, just take a step back, just lean in, take a deep breath, and listen to what we're saying. And if that light bulb doesn't turn on upstairs, it's okay. If you feel uncomfortable, it's okay. The idea is to just find a comfort, breathe a little bit, and maybe it's when you walk away from this, go to an organization, etc., and hang out with them, do some things with them, etc., and you'll be able to learn. You'll be able to also change your lens. That's the most important thing, being able to change your lens, and you'll be able to see a lot what's going on. Because if you lived your life a certain way, again, having that white privilege, there's a choice. There's a choice that you got. You got two choices. Either you can step in and lean in with me and lean into this group here, etc., or you also got a choice to not step in. And by not stepping in, you won't see what we're talking about. You know, and it's so important. Yeah, so important.
So Chad, I have to kind of disagree with you on one point on there. When, yes, it's good for us to get out together, but even, for instance, I went out with a group and, African Americans, and the looks that you get, out there, even as a group, you actually see fear on some people's faces because they see a group of us, you know, and even if you're with a group of people, especially African Americans who are grouped up and going out, depending on where they're at, it's still not a safe place to be, It's almost like you're okay if you're with white people, but if you're with a group of Black people, you're still getting that mean mugging look and side eye and what are y'all doing out here? And you need to go back to the city, things like that. So, it's one of those catch-22s where it all depends on who you're with, and hope and pray that anyone that you bump into is in a good mood and is not a racist. Right.
And it's FYI, Sharon, you didn't disagree. We both agree on the same. It's just it's all good and everything like that. Because you're right. I was just talking about the groups of why we are together in groups, but you're right. If a bunch of African Americans in one group walk out in the outdoors, the perspective of that is a little bit more intimidating.
Yeah, you get mean mugs, you get, what are you doing here? And you need to go back to the city because they, automatically think you're city folk. And so it's for me, I feel a little bit, I feel more secure being out there with my white friends because I've been through that before. Even rolling through little towns. I'm sure you've seen it, Chad, rolling through these little Oregon and Washington towns. Yeah. And, and you're driving through the city, through the little town, the one stop sign, maybe one signal light town. And, everybody in the town is watching you go by in the car, breaking their necks to make sure you keep going.
Yeah. Those are the towns. When I see those towns, actually, knowing me when I'm traveling, when I'm by myself, and me and my dog, etc. It's always one of those things that we always say, and of course, I think everybody will probably understand what I'm about to say. It's like You know, you try to gas up as much as you can to keep going through. That way you don't have to stop, you know, and everything like that, you know. But no, I've been in places where I get looked at, and it's that you don't belong here type of look, basically, you know. And so I just kind of like do what I need to do and just move forward, you know, and everything like that, you know. But yeah, you know, it's around us. It's totally around us, you know. But yeah.
Well, I don't disagree with either one of you, but frankly, I think that the last thing I'm going to want to do is internalize what I think other people are thinking of me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, I would much rather elicit a confrontation so I know what they're thinking, so that I'm not guessing. But the one thing I definitely won't do is curb my behavior based on what I think someone is thinking of me,
Right.
without any evidence other than the way I think they're looking at me. You know, I mean, so I think that there's a lot to be said for going out in large groups or of people who look like you, for in the interest of having there be safety in numbers. But at the same time, though, I mean, I don't think that we should do it in such a way that we are changing how we're walking through the world. I think that, you know, we should always, you know, I mean, and Chad, you and I have been places together where we have been, you know, the two black dudes in the room.
I know, right?
You know, and frankly, it's you, me, and your dog. And but I mean, I got your back, you got mine, and we're gonna do our thing. We're gonna go fishing. You know,
Right.
we're gonna hang out in, you know, in a restaurant or a coffee shop or a bar, and we are going to be us.
Yeah,
Okay?
exactly.
And we're not gonna let anybody tell us how we're gonna be who we are. You know, because frankly, that degree of intimidation is how they win.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
if they look at us hard enough and long enough and make us feel uncomfortable, you know,
Right.
and if they don't want us to come back, that's exactly, if we don't, that's exactly what they wanted all along. You know,
Yeah.
and so when we invite the looks, we invite the stares, and people do look at us, you know, cockeyed, and we come back, maybe they'll stop doing it. You know,
Mhm.
maybe they'll get used to seeing us. You know, maybe they'll get to the point where they'll say, all right, well, here they are again. I guess they're pretty cool. You know, it's like, wow, look at the clothes they're wearing. Look at the music they're listening. Listen to the music that they're listening to. You know,
And James, you're
wow,
right.
I've never seen, I'm sorry?
I
Yeah,
said you're right about that.
yeah,
Going back.
because we really have to lead, you know, and because I mean, because one of the things that I love most about, you know, Soul River, Chad, is your fashion. Okay. You know, I mean, seriously, you know, the colors and the styles and the graphics that you brought into the outdoor industry is unique and it's vibrant. And the last thing I want to see you do is hide that from anybody.
Right.
Okay, I want you to be loud and proud, and I want you to show that, and I want you to have people say, "Wow, I want to be as cool as Chad." But he's black, yeah, but I still want to be as cool as Chad because, you know, he's setting the standard for, you know, who I want to be as a person in the outdoors. That's what we should be aspiring to. You know, I don't
Right.
think we should ever say, "Oh, you know, I don't like the way they're looking at us, so let's not show up."
Yeah.
Screw that. I'm going fishing.
I agree with you on that because I bought 100 acres in Washington, and it's a very small town, population 90. I was 90, population 91. And at first, I just got the looks and the, you know, when you walk into the restaurant, everybody shuts up and turns their head to look, you know. And the first time that I went out there, I really felt that uncomfortable. I mean, I can cut the uncomfortability, you know, with a knife as I walk in to get to the nearest table to sit down, and feel very, very awkward when I'm there. But then the second and third time that I came, then everyone's like, "Hey, how you doing?" And now they want to get to know you. So I agree with the part on keep going back, because, you know, with this area, you know, I ended up purchasing the property, and, you know, now it's like they're comfortable with me now. You know what I mean? At first they felt very uncomfortable being around me, but once they got to know and had a little conversation with me, then it was more on, "Oh yeah, that's Sharon, you know, she's an Afrovivalist, you know, she's gonna go hunting with us," or something. So now they feel comfortable with me. Granted, it's 8 years later, but I feel comfortable in that small town now, and I haven't had any problems up there other than, you know, one snarky comment a gentleman had mentioned. I went up there turkey season, and I went to my neighbor and just to check in with them, to let them know that I was on the property and see how they were doing. And one of the neighbors down about 100 acres in front of us came up the hill and said, "Hey, I just got a deer, and I can't field dress it because he had cut himself right here, and so he was just gushing out with blood, so he didn't want to get it contaminated, and he asked the men if they would go down there and field dress it for him." And I was like, can I come? So ended up going down there and helping them, and the conversation as the couple hours went on was, yeah, there's this black guy, and this person who took down this deer forgot that I was there, the lone black person, let alone woman. And because I was standing kind of behind him, and he says, yeah, you know, there's a black guy who bought property across the highway. You know, I've seen him out there, and, you know, I don't know what kind of person he is, but I'm definitely going to have my eye on him. And at that point, I chimed in and took a couple steps next to him and said, "Oh, really? What's he look like? Is he handsome?" And he was just like turned beet red, you know, because he forgot that I was there. And long story short, it was me. You know, he saw me one day walking the property because I had a skull cap on and a scarf on and all this stuff where I'm sure he couldn't tell that I was a man or a woman, you know, because I'm manly built, I guess. So he was really, really embarrassed about the fact that, you know, he had even brought that up. And then once I brought it to his attention that it was my property, and he's like, "Oh, well, okay, well, maybe it wasn't a man. I just thought it was a man." And, you know, so he just, you know, kind of blew that out into proportion. And if I didn't stop that rumor, it would have turned into something, you know, even more. And those are old school men. They were in their 70s. So, you know, they went through talking about the N-words and those people, and because the way he was talking about it, you know, yeah, I got a black man coming in, and, you know, and I don't even know if I like that, you know. So my question to the guys is, for me, when I walk into racist situations, it feels like I am more welcome than my black brother is. You know, I am more accepted in that space than a black man is. And I'm wondering, you guys feel that? Have you guys seen that and recognized that? Because I've had an eyewitness to it, and it was hurtful to see, you know, how they were more accepting of me, but then want to, you know, talk bad or make the black man feel like he's not welcome. Guys?
I think when I walk into spaces, I think people are confused. People are trying to figure out, who's this guy? They're trying to place me, trying to put me in some type of category, you know. Yeah, because I've been told that I present a package, you know, a really interesting presentation. I have my dog with me. I'm tatted up, you know, I'm a big guy, bald, African American, you know. So I step in the space. There's a big presentation, so you know. So, but yeah, you know. So I think I have everybody scratching their head all the time, trying to figure out, you know, where I'm standing and what I'm doing here, basically, you know. So you know, but you know, I think when I'm in spaces, you know, and when that passes down and kind of quiets down the scratching the head, I have found myself in conversations, having experience where people, it would be this I would call it this kind of like this gatekeeper mentality of I'm the expert in this sport, and and I'm, you are inviting into my kind of like it's almost kind of like hiring an expert, right? And you're allowing the expert to teach you. So instead of being hired, it just automatically happens. There's this default of fact that I don't know, or I'm not good enough, or whatever the case is. But there's this place where they feel like they have to take this step up and play this expert type of mentality. Like, I'm the gatekeeper of the knowledge of camping. I'm the gatekeeper of the knowledge of backpacking. I'm the gatekeeper of the knowledge of hunting or archery or whatever the case is. And then, but as I move forward in that conversation, and 3, 4, 5 minutes later, when I have the opportunity to maybe, because I don't really like to throw my resume out, but I do find myself where I have to throw my resume out, and talk about it. And when they do, that's a whole different conversation now. It's like, oh, well, I didn't know. Well, if you would have just get to know me before you take that mentality with me, then you wouldn't have to tell me all this, because you would have learned. That's the thing, is where you're not taking the time to learn, with me. You're not taking the time to get to know me. There's a lot of judgments that you're pulling based off of my image, the presentation, etc. And really, we need to be learning how to connect with people and learn how to talk to people and converse and learn, amongst each other before we can start judging, because we do a lot of that in all our society. Everywhere we go, there's a lot of judging that forms our pre-thinking of what we may think about that person, and reality is that we need just to take a step back. If you feel uncomfortable, it's okay. Just get to know that person. Ask the basics of questions. How are you doing? What's your name? Where you come from? And you build from there. And I think that's also the beginning steps of making that person feel welcome. Because you're getting to know them. You're having the basic fundamental conversation, and that's really what makes a person feel welcome as well, and showing love. Love is king. And that's the most important thing. Love is king in everything you do, and that should be the forefront of everything that you put your heart into, putting your heart into the people that's around you. Love is king, and practice love. That's the most important thing. But yeah.
Well,
Awesome.
I have been in situations where, when you're talking about, have a conversation, when I have one of those smart aleck people who want to say something to me in one of those little small towns, I literally walk up to them, have a seat next to them, and say, "Hey, I'm Sharon. How are you? What's your name?" And they don't want to talk. But it's like, okay, if you're going to bring out a comment like that, then let's talk about it. Of course, I'm in an area where I know it's not going to be a situation where I'm going to have a chair thrown at me or something. I'm always cautious about it, but there is times where I've confronted people and said, "You know what? So tell me how you really feel. Let's talk about this. Why don't you like my skin color?" And that throws people, that throws them off guard,
Yeah.
and then it opens up conversation. So, and some of that conversation really, really hurt, because some of those people were very, very honest about how they feel, and and we're admitting to the fact that my mother and grandfather and great great grandfather told me about you people. So it's like generations of being taught that we're the boogeyman, because of our skin color. And I think if we can stop that at home, this world would be such a better place.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to add a couple thoughts to that. For the audience, if none of these experiences seem relatable to you, that is privilege right there in and of itself. The fact that you can go to those small towns, not have those feelings. And it's important to recognize that privilege is a spectrum, and we all have our own individual diversity stories. So I have privilege as a male, and Chad and James that Sharon does not. There are white males who have privilege by being a white male, but maybe they're part of the LGBTQ community and they deal with hardship and adversity on that. As a woman, you've got half of the world seemingly against you all the time for your whole life. And if you're a woman of color or an indigenous woman, you're even a much smaller boat. So
Double bullseye.
so I think it's important for people to embrace those differences, acknowledge the different lived experiences, and be open to these interactions. It's an opportunity to not get out of your comfort zone, but to expand your comfort zone and be more comfortable in a much more diverse and enriching, social setting. And we can all benefit from that. And on that note, we've got some really good questions coming in from the audience that we'd love to dive into. Let's start kind of a good starter here, but a lot of folks, of the lighter pigment have been asking, if I was to encounter somebody who looks different from me on the trails, these people of color, I'd be grateful to see and encounter you there because I'm not used to that. Is it appropriate to express that? And if so or not, how would one best do so?
That's a tough one because we've got some people of color who would take that comment and would not like it. Some people may think that you would bring up that topic to start trouble or whatever, but it all depends on the demeanor and the mood of the person you walk up onto.
Yeah. Was that question? Can you say that question? I'm sorry, I missed that. I didn't quite.
For our white audience, if they were to, in an outdoor setting on a trail or on the river and come across folks of color and be happy, generally, I'm assuming based on this question, about that scenario and want to express that, what would be an appropriate way to go about that?
What express what though?
That they are happy to see a man or a woman of color on the river with them.
Got you.
I would say that it's completely inappropriate. I mean, it reminds me of when I was a kid and people used to ask to touch my hair.
Right.
Okay. I think that the best way to express your happiness is to just smile and be friendly and not say anything directly related to what you're thinking in that particular position until you know the person well enough to say, I got to tell you, after we spent the last day and a half together, I want you to know that I don't see very many people of color out here, and I think it's awesome. I'm really glad, and I hope that you'll continue to come out here. Not on the first meeting, not the first time you lay eyes on somebody, because I mean, it reminds me of that Blair Underwood video, yes. Black Hiker.
Yeah.
I mean, and people think that is fantasy. That happens. Okay, yeah. That is an actual lived experience that I personally had. Okay, It's embarrassing. It's for me, it's profoundly disappointing. And if you're asking me personally, I'm going to say, please, for God's sake, don't do that.
Yeah, I agree with James and Sharon. Both of them. My answer is pretty much the same. I don't think it's really about acting surprised. I think that I would flip that question back to you of how you treat your friends when they're out there and when you see them. You don't approach them and act surprised. You say, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. And I think just being really nice and again, you'll probably hear me say this a lot, stick to the basics of conversation and use those basics as building blocks. Show love. Hey, how are you doing? Have a nice day. How's your day? Etc. Just, really basic conversation. Those are little welcoming, I would say welcoming invites into the space that you're acknowledging, you see me, we're sharing the same space, we're moving together. And you don't have to stay around for a long time, just say, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Yeah. That's it, and that's all it takes. That's really all it takes, but to step into a space and say what that question was, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, it'd be like if I was at the
Same
gym
age
and say like, oh, it's so nice to see a woman here lifting weights. Like that would just be
Right.
weird and socially awkward. I'm not going to do that. So yeah, I guess my answer would be, oftentimes we're all familiar with the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. And I learned recently about the platinum rule, which is do unto others as they would have you do to them. And I really like the way, the more I think about that, is it's just a sign of respect for another human being. And just like Chad said, a simple smile, hello, how are you doing? Beautiful river today, running nice, just be cool.
Yeah.
All right, we've got some other really good questions here. Let's see. Some organizations that bring people of color in the outdoors have begun to provide trainings to help their participants to respond to racism in the outdoors, and also likewise for LGBTQ folks. What recommendations do you have for people of color to respond to threats directed to them in the outdoors where they are in a vulnerable environment? So I guess that's kind of putting into motion a lot of the stuff we've talked about.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think the worst, I wrote in that article and I was like, the worst fear that can ever happen are, African American in the outdoors that lurks generational is lynching. And just to pull out of that, what I just said is, and going back to that question is, the worst fear that I don't want to experience, but it kind of lurks, is to be caught in a situation in the outdoors and in that place where it's a question mark. And I don't know, I don't really have an answer for that. And I guess when that something like that happens, and God forbid we don't want that to happen, the best thing is like, let me just say, the best thing to do is, if you are going to go to the outdoors by yourself, you probably do the fundamentals of letting someone know and what time you're going to be
Don't
back.
do it.
So Sharon she says don't do it. If you feel that way, don't do it. And that's coming from a woman, but if you do feel that way and you still want to step out, it's probably best is to let someone know what time you plan to be back, and go through the basics of safety with people and let people know, etc. And that's the best thing to do. Carry bear spray with you. That's a deterrent. If something was to happen or whatever, at least you have something on you to protect yourself if it gets into that space. Hopefully you don't have to
have a gun.
Sharon, as a woman, she mentioned a gun, having a weapon. I didn't want to go there. And yeah, Sharon carries. I carry, but that's another conversation, another space. But I hope to God that we shouldn't find ourselves having to go. It's a problem that if people have to go out and protect themselves on that level like that, then that's really a problem in the outdoors. We really need to start addressing that if people having that fear. And really what's happening is that fear is coming from the people of ignorance going into the outdoors and what we're about to face here. That's what's going on here, and we need to come up with a better strategy and system, and how do we dismantle that ugliness for it not going into the outdoors, or how do we educate that ugliness, to not to react to people of color in an ugly way in the outdoors, to put people in a place of feeling unsafe,
Right.
And everything like that, So that's a larger conversation. That's an ongoing conversation, and that's a good question. I mean, James, do you have any?
I would say to just de-escalate it the best way that you can. If it does get confrontational, you got your bear spray. Utilize that first. And just find your way out of there, with hopes that they have no friends in the forest, and just get yourself out of there the best way that you can. It's one of those smile, be nice, and keep walking kind of thing. You know, make sure they're going the opposite direction that you are to find yourself to a safer spot.
Yeah.
Just
And I think, Jim, you may have something to say. I just want to say to everybody who's listening out there, this is a real fear. It really is a real fear. Being of color, being Black, and going into the outdoors. That's a fear that lives in a lot of African American people that are going into the outdoors. Also Hispanic people, and also women. Women carries that kind of fear, themselves and everything, so it's a real fear. It's something real that we need to pay attention, because the outdoors needs to be safe, and we need to have that access, for all of us. Everybody should be able to enjoy the outdoors without having to walk into a green space with that fear over your back. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't have to do that. James, do you want to speak to that, or?
Yeah, and it's really interesting, because I mean, in 30 years, I don't think I've ever had an encounter with someone that I felt was meant to do me harm.
lucky.
Indeed, I consider myself very lucky in that regard. But like you, I think that it's important that if you are in a situation like that, you've got to, understand how best to de-escalate.
Yes.
And how best to, manage, your environment. I'm not a believer in standing one's ground, unless you're prepared to die on that ground. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, you're better off, packing up your kit and going home. If that's, what it ultimately boils down to, and live to camp another day, if that's what the circumstances are. But, I think, more than anything else, I mean, most confrontations occur when force is met with resistance, and sometimes if you don't give that force something to resist against, it typically abates itself and goes away.
Yeah.
Now, under some circumstances, you get followed, and you could get chased, and that's something else entirely. But, I think that there's something to be said for just taking yourself out of the situation, and allowing your calm demeanor to resolve the matter, in time, because it typically, will not last under most circumstances. Because at a certain point, if someone is dead set on not having you be in a certain place, there's nothing you can do that is going to be anything other than harmful for somebody, and it's probably going to be yourself.
Yeah. And
Awesome.
going on what James said is, I'll just say this one thing is, if you want to pursue the outdoors and you do have that fear, preparedness is always key. So the way you plan, the way you pack your backpack, etc. There's nothing wrong of planning for worst case scenario if something was to happen, meaning that pack a bear spray. You may be in a place where there ain't no bears, but trust me, that bear spray that we work on bears, it'll definitely work on humans. Trust me.
Yep. If you don't
pack
have
a bear spray. Pack a first aid kit. Pack a really good first aid kit. Every first aid kit that I carry, I don't carry an individual kit. I carry the type of kit that's made for a group, because it tends to have a little bit much more. And you never know, but pack a really good solid first aid kit, because situations, whatever the case is, you may have to be in the place, and if you get hurt, you may have to, take care of yourself. Pack a bivy, type of shelter type. That if you have to run away, you can't pack up your campsite, etc. You got to get out of there. You got a bivy, right? And you can be able to take cover if it rains, etc. And so, but yeah, there's little things. I think preparedness, when you go in the outdoors to enjoy, you may not ever have to use those, but the more you can prepare in those little things like that, you never know, it can help. Those little things can help in the situation of when your day turns into survival mode, period.
Yeah. I think, sorry, Chad. I think also with that topic of being prepared and having things with you is make sure you have devices to secure your perimeter, because when you're camped out, you want to know what's going to be walking up on you and be prepared for that. Because, depending on where you are in the woods, a lot of people know the areas that we are new to. So therefore, if you're in a campsite, secure your area with the things like the mouse trap and the glow stick, with the fishing line to do your perimeter. If someone crosses that perimeter, you know exactly where they are, and you know if it's an animal or a person, from there. So it's not just having your first aid kits, your food and all that stuff, is you want to make sure you have devices that will secure your perimeter so you can sleep good at night.
Yeah, yeah. It's all about being prepared. That's really what it comes down to. Prepare. That's the best that you could, everything. Yeah, that's the best that you can do.
That's actually a good segue into this this next question that I want to get to before we run short on time. But in order for our audience to better prepare for being co-collaborators and allies out in the outdoor spaces, if you could articulate, what does authentic allyship in the outdoors look like to y'all? And could you provide an example of what might be helpful in that situation, or something that's happened in the past that has proven to be valuable allyship?
That was a long question, and I was reading, so I didn't hear that. Sorry.
What does authentic allyship in an outdoor space look like to you? A short version.
Okay. It looks fun, and it looks comfortable and enjoyable.
So like as a normal outdoor situation should be.
Yes, it should be. After I get over the initial shock of being somewhere that I'm not familiar with, and getting to know their surroundings, and like I said, putting up my perimeter stuff and setting up camp, and knowing that the people that I'm with have my back, then it does slowly turn into a space that is enjoyable, and I can let my guard down. So it's about having the right people around you.
Well, I think in terms of allyship, I mean, to me, I prefer to work with people who, as Chad mentioned earlier, aren't there to play the savior, but are actually prepared to be a collaborator and a partner, as opposed to, someone who's there to try to help you make them more comfortable. Frankly, I prefer allies that are comfortable with being uncomfortable, that like the idea of being tested and challenged, and will push against their own lack of understanding for their privilege, their bias, and not have a good idea as to exactly what the answers are. Because frankly, we're all trying to figure this out together, and it's really not going to be, we learn that we know nothing, that we can ever learn anything.
Yeah. I agree with both, and lean to what James is saying. And I think, when it's that learn and unlearn, it's that partnership, and what James is talking about. I can even, bring this into the space of when we're talking about racism, that's learn, hate is learned, and I've been in many spaces where I had to share the same space with quite a few people that has been on the other side of enraged and hate and ignorance. And I had some really interesting experiences by sharing that same space, where we would have this exchange of challenging conversations, and then at the end, our conversation is, "I'll talk to you later, brother." So I totally understand what James is talking about. I think I think it's awesome when you can actually connect with someone with the big question marks and kind of like this uncertainty, et cetera, into the space, and may have all of these barriers, but if they have this one open window where they, I'm going to give this a shot, I'm going to give this a try, that is an opportunity to create a really awesome partnership. It's an opportunity to foster that, because what's happened is that when that person steps in that space, we have an opportunity to educate one another now. You know, we have an opportunity to really raise the bar here, and allow the ignorance to drop and step in as a whole and be able to talk, and learn from one another. And, I've seen it happen all the time. I've seen it happen all the time. And I'm a big believer. It's like that ignorance, the hate, the racism that lurks, it's so much learned, but it can also be unlearned if you happen to have it in the right context, in the right space, and both people will walk away with, wow, I just learned something. And you know what? He's pretty cool, or she's awesome, and we can move forward together. I think, today a lot of us operate even in the green space of conservation, may have kind of like butt up a little bit and with people of color and connect and know the first and last name and have a conversation, have lunch, and that's it. The education stops right there. But if we can like cross the planes, and cross the lines where we can step in, your life, you can step in my life, and probably it's going out in the woods, having to camp in and move forward and everything like that. The challenges, when you have, dealing with challenges, struggle of athletic, how the outdoors, nature has a way of challenging you. All your thoughts of whatever you think of, that drops to the side, because now it's like, we have to work together. We got to come together and work together through this process, and at the end of the day, we all, we learn a little bit much more about one another. And I don't want to throw this in, but it's a really good example. You look at military boot camp. You got people from all over the United States coming in, off the bus, first day going to boot camp. Nobody don't know each other. You up there with people from Idaho, Minnesota, New York, everybody, but the way that is, they mesh you all together and they make it hard. You're going through all this kind of crazy training. And when you get through that training, you know what? You're wearing one uniform, your differences go to the left, differences go to the right. And you realize it's like, in order to get through this hellhole, we got to come together and work together, let our differences drop, because you're my brother, you're my sister. I'm going to, if I fall, you're going to catch me. If you fall, I'm going to catch you, and we're going to finish the period, So what James is talking about, I think, that's an awesome, positive outlook to, to work with people, especially, if they're already kind of having their pre mindset of what they may think. That's probably the perfect opportunity to step in that space and create relationship. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd say as somebody who's on the other side of that partnership, that equation, for me personally, as I've been interpreting authentic allyship, I think of it as being a part of a team, and like you said, Chad, teamwork. So, for those in the audience who've experienced team sports, think of it that way. You want to put your teammates in positions to succeed. You want to inspire your teammates to be the best versions of themselves. If you're on the court or the playing field, you're working together cohesively. If you're on the sideline, you're still engaged, you're cheering, you're supporting, you're actively taking part in the success of the team. And, it's people coming together to achieve a common goal. And, that's only going to be achieved when, you sort of dissolve the self and the ego, and you put those differences and those, feelings of me aside, and you commit to that team framework and that team goal. And so to me, that's kind of how I look at that for the authentic allyship. We're kind of running short on time. So to wrap things up, Chad, if you could, we're kind of came to this conversation to look for opportunities to create new alliances.
Yeah.
To make new friends and to learn from one another, build better, safer communities as we move forward and engage with the urban and outdoor world. So, how do we move forward from here? What can we take away as members of this conversation to share more widely?
Just to throw, step in and say something. I'm sure, James and Sharon will have some things that they want to add to it. I'm going to say, how do we move forward? From an organization or even an outdoor company, and I know that there's already this beginning of creating mission statements, really to present to the public of what that company or that organization is going to do. That's number one, and that's fine, and that's awesome. I think to take it further is to create action steps according to what that mission statement is, because it just doesn't stop right there. We got to go a little bit further here into the process. And so I think once we create these action steps of whatever that is that's aligned with the mission, we make enough steps that's going to take us into working with organization groups. And I think also invite, when it gets to that place, invite leaders, people of color, leaders of organizations into those conversations, and build that relationship where that leader and that organization or company, they can have a collaboration about the action steps and about what needs to take place. So now that company and organization has eyes not only on the inside of internal, but they also have the eyes on the outside, because that leader, they're sitting at the table and they are collaborating. And that's what it's going to take. We're going to have to create more collaborations and more integrations if we, as a company or as an organization, is going to step in and want to help, saying, this is what we want to do. How can we do it? Well, this is how we need to do it. This is how we need to support the people of color organizations. If it's an individual, you bypass all of that and jump straight to that leader of that organization. And you start collaborating with it, collaborate between that leader and that individual, and come up with an action plan as well of what you can do with this organization. There's a lot of work that needs to be done here. There's a lot of work. I mean, it's phenomenal of the amount of work. Some of these people of color, of the organizations, Indigenous, Hispanic, African American, a lot of them are operating as a one-man show. Some of them operating lack of staff. And so there's a lot of work, that could be supported on many different levels. It's just if you're interested in wanting to get involved to support it's critical to open that space up and invite these organizations into that table and sit down and talk about it. Don't solve the problem from your end. Have that conversation and let the conversation solve the problem together as you guys are collaborating. And I would say that those are some big steps. It's a process, but I'm going to pull back out and allow James and Sharon to step in on that.
Well, I think it ultimately boils down to what I tell my students, and I think that it's important that you have, first of all, benchmarks and goals. You want to know exactly where it is that you're planning on getting to, and being able to monitor where you are going relative to where you are right now. Also, I think that it's really important that you have what I like to describe as quantifiable outcomes. How do you know whether or not you're successful unless you have, done things that have moved your organization forward? So if we're talking about having a 20% increase in your points of engagement in communities of color, if your current level of engagement now is 0, 20% is a huge leap. And so the question then is, if that is your goal, how do you get there? And how do you monitor your progress? And what have you done that was unsuccessful? And what might you do differently next time in order to be successful? Because I'm a big believer in making sure that you fail big, fail often, fail again, but don't be afraid of failure. You've got to keep trying. Because really the only way you can lose is if you give up. And too often organizations allow themselves to become frightened into inaction because they're afraid of doing something wrong. They're afraid of doing something that's going to get them called out on social media. They're afraid of losing followers or customers in their business. But if they're prepared to do the work, and if they're prepared to make legitimate sacrifices of time and resources and money to make these positive changes, that's really the only way that it's going to happen. And I think that if organizations can commit to that, we'll ultimately be much further down the road tomorrow than we are today.
And I would say just be authentic as you can when you're talking about the subject. Don't try to be someone that you're not, and show that true person, that true task that you want to accomplish, and not sugarcoat it to be something else. Just be genuine about it, you know, and be you. I mean, if you want that to happen and you want to attract certain people to you, you know, you've got to show your true heart and your true will of trying to make this the best thing that you would want.
Awesome. Yeah, and I to kind of tie that all up, if I could implore one thing to the audience to take away from all of this dialogue is be more curious. You know, curiosity is the currency of change, and that's what we're striving for. So,
Yeah.
you know, we don't know what we don't know. So be curious, ask questions, commit to learning constantly, be a student of the world you're existing in, and try to be a better version of yourself in that world, not only for you, but for others that are around you, and we can make a lot of headway.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. Now you got 3 people that you can reach out to answer your questions.
Awesome. Well, I think we're running to the end of time here. Chad, do you want to say some parting words to the audience?
Yeah, you know, first of all, I just want to say thank you for, you know, people, you know, listening, and I hope, you know, what we shared is you got to take away and implement. This is an ongoing conversation, it's an ongoing process, you know, and I really encourage everybody to, you know, lean into, you know, people of color and get to know them on a personal level. You know, it'll help change your lens and help you understand a little bit much deeper what's going on. And I think the biggest thing is that we need to always remember is to practice love for one another. You know, love is really the most important thing. It's really what's going to dismantle the frustration, dismantle the racism, the ignorance, the hate, you know, and we got to be able to start working and showing up and showing our love for one another. That's the most important thing. It's the basics. You know, there's a lot of stuff happening around us and a lot of ugliness. And at the end of the day, we need to be able to show that love, you know, because that's where we need to be, showing more love. Thank you for everybody. You know, I also want to say, you know, acknowledge some outdoor people of color groups out there, along with Soul River. You know, feel free if you wanted to support the organization from a volunteer standpoint, financial, et cetera, is your call. But I also want to give a shout out to Outdoor Afro, Black Girls Do Bike, Girls Trek, Inclusive Woods and Us, Soul Track, Brown Folks Fishing, Millennium Base Camp, you know, and I just wanted to say, you know, acknowledge those other organizations that are doing awesome work as well. I think Jamie is going to send that out to everybody as well, and you can do your research and find about these other organizations that are doing the good work of bringing more people of color into the outdoors and trying to make the place safe, healthy, easy access, etc. So I just want to say thank you very much for everyone showing up in for this conversation.
I can add to his list, please. Decamp Outdoors.
Decamp Outdoors.
Decamp Outdoors is a preparedness camp for city folks, and it is a camp that is pretty much cover the bases from how to establish a primitive camp to all the way to how to harvest an animal, cook outside. It's covering a little bit of everything. So if you're looking to prepare and get prepared for this next phase and future disasters, please feel free to go to Decamp Outdoors or visit afrovivalist.com.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you very much for taking the time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. It's awesome.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great
Bye-bye.
night.
Thank you.